December 18th, 1944. Philippine Sea, 14,000 feet above a scattered overcast layer. The morning sun had just begun breaking across the Pacific, turning the tops of the clouds into glowing, drifting islands as if carved from molten gold. But above them, the air carried a taut silence, the kind of silence only combat pilots recognized. The silence that came just before someone died. An FM-2 Wildcat, smaller, lighter, and supposedly outclassed, shuddered as its Wright R-1820 engine growled at combat climb power. Inside the cramped cockpit sat Ensign Robert Bobby Halvorsen, age 22, Iowa farm boy, the son of a dairy operator who had once told him, "A good turn can outsmart even the strongest bull." He hoped to God that applied to Japanese fighters too. Halvorsen's Wildcat belonged to VC-81, operating from the tiny escort carrier USS Savo Island, part of Taffy 3's broader support groups, still reeling from months of brutal operations around Leyte. The FM-2 was an odd bird in the late war skies. Lightened frame, higher power-to-weight ratio, and unbelievably tight low-speed turning capability. But to Japanese pilots, especially the proud Zero veterans, it was still the little fat grumman, slow, primitive, laughably obsolete. And that morning, the Zeros were indeed laughing, setting the stage. The mission had begun an hour earlier. Halvorsen and three other pilots, Lieutenant J.G. David Moriarty, Ensign Paul Nakamura, and Lieutenant Sam Dutch Dwyer, had launched for a combat air patrol over the vulnerable escort carriers. Below them, the slow flat tops cut through a steel blue ocean, wake lines shimmering under the rising sun. The carriers were jammed with bombers, ordnance, and exhausted deck crews. If the Japanese broke through again, as they had during the Marianas Turkey Shoot and the battle off Samar, disaster could follow. The radio crackled. "Red section, radar shows multiple bogies inbound. Altitude 12,000, range 40 miles. Dwyer answered immediately. "Red leader copies. Red section, tighten up. We climb." Halvorsen swallowed, tightening his lap belt. His heartbeat thudded with an uneven rhythm, too fast to hide, too human to control. He thought suddenly of his mother back in Iowa, rolling dough at the kitchen table, asking if he wanted more butter on his cornbread. The memory stung, but it steadied him. His gloved hand eased the throttle forward. The FM-2 responded with a rising snarl. Enter the enemy. At 14,800 feet, the first glints appeared, specks of sunlight catching wingtips. 8 A6 M5 Zeros diving in a shallow formation. Their pilots had no reason to fear. The Zero had outturned, outclimbed, and out-accelerated Wildcats since 1942. One Zero flight leader, Lieutenant Kiyoshi Tanaka, a veteran with over 20 kills, rolled inverted for his attack run. Through his canopy, he studied the American fighters below. He recognized the dumpy silhouette of the Wildcat. Tanaka allowed himself a sharp grin. "Carrera wa mada kono hikoki o tsukate iru." They are still flying that thing. His wingmen chuckled over the radio. To them, the FM-2 was prey. The moment before impact. Dwyer's voice, calm, gravelly, but sharpened with tension, cut across the radio net. "Red section, break into them on my mark." Halvorsen felt sweat gathering under his oxygen mask. He nudged his Wildcat into a shallow left turn, gaining a sliver of positional advantage. The Wildcat wasn't fast. It wasn't glamorous. But at low speed, at the edge of a stall, its stubby wings dug into the air with bulldog stubbornness. The Zeros continued their descent, perfect, disciplined, confident. Halvorsen muttered to himself, barely audible inside his mask. Come on, Bobby. Wait for it. Don't flinch. Altitude, 12,900 feet. Closing speed, 310 knots. Separation, 4,000 yards. And then he saw Tanaka's Zero waggle slightly, preparing to roll into its firing angle. Sunlight streamed across its fuselage, turning the rising sun Hinomaru into a bloody disk. Dwyer shouted, "Brake! Brake! Brake!" Halvorsen snapped his Wildcat into a vicious left turn, full rudder, stick hard back, throttle yanked to the firewall. The FM-2 groaned as airflow clawed across its wings, but it held. And in that instant, something entirely unexpected happened. The Zero chasing him overshot. Too fast, too shallow, too confident. Bobby Halvorsen watched the enemy slide past his nose, wobbling as its pilot tried to correct. The laughter stopped. The deadly spiral had begun. Tanaka felt it immediately, an uncomfortable lurch in his Zero's controls as the American fighter carved a turn far tighter than he expected. His practiced eyes widened. That is no standard Wildcat. The FM-2's lighter airframe and uprated engine were doing exactly what the Grumman engineers promised, clawing through the air at low speed like a cornered animal, refusing to yield. Halvorsen held his breath as the horizon snapped sideways. The Wildcat pressed into the turn with brutal force, his vision tunneling at the edges. He trimmed instinctively, countering the torque with practiced precision. Behind him, the Zero slewed high, unable to hold the same radius. The spiral tightened. Altitude fell. 12,500 feet, 12,200, 11,900. Engine RPM flirted with redline. The control stick trembled like a live wire in Halvorsen's hand. Through gritted teeth, he whispered, "Come on, just a little more." The Zero pilots realized the mistake. Tanaka cursed softly in Japanese and yanked his throttle back, trying to bleed speed and re-enter the fight. But his wingman, Petty Officer Ichiro Sato, called out over the radio, panic perforating his voice. "Chosa-kan, kare wa maku shitemasu. Commander, he's turning inside us." Another Zero slashed down past them, trying to cut Halvorsen's circle from above, but the American pilot rolled right, dropped a notch of flaps, and squeezed a tighter pivot. The FM-2 shuddered at the edge of aerodynamic sanity. The Zero pilot overshot again. And now, Halvorsen had the nose. The Wildcat's .450 caliber Browning guns were primed, 267 rounds per gun. Not much for a long fight, but more than enough for a single well-placed burst. He lined up the drifting silhouette of Sato's Zero just as it attempted to climb back into the vertical. Range, 180 yards. Angle off, nearly perfect. Closure, slow, ideal for killing. Halvorsen exhaled once and pressed the trigger. Fire in the sky. 4 streams of incandescent tracers tore across the air, ripping through the morning calm like a horizontal lightning strike. The .50 calibers slammed into the Zero's left wing root, detonating fuel vapors trapped in the skin's cloth and wood structure. Sato's fighter bloomed into an expanding flower of orange fire. The Zero burst apart, wings shearing away, fuselage fracturing into a jagged spiral of metal and smoke. A brief silhouette of the pilot flashed as his canopy blew open, too late, before the remains tumbled into the clouds below. Halvorsen flinched, not from fear, but from the violence of it. His first real kill, his first real moment of lethal success. His hands trembled, but he kept flying. Dwyer crackled in on the radio. "Good shooting, Red 4. Keep moving. We've got more coming in hot." Halvorsen forced himself to breathe. 1 kill. 7 more enemy aircraft still diving toward the taffy flat tops. He shoved his throttle again, pushing the FM-2 back into a climb. The engine roared, coughing on thin air, but still pulling. Below, the escort carriers were already turning into the wind, preparing for emergency launches and desperate landings. On the open decks, sailors pointed upward, watching the dogfight unfold like a chaotic ballet against the lightning sky. The altitude band battle begins. Moriarity's Wildcat streaked past Halvorsen's right side, banking hard. 2 Zeros clung to his tail, spitting 7.7mm fire that traced bright sparks across the FM-2's armor plating. Moriarity, a Boston-born ex-mechanic's apprentice, fought with stubborn precision, chopping throttle, dumping speed, forcing 1 Zero into a high-side slip. Halvorsen dove in behind the second Zero, guns ready, but the enemy rolled violently, skidding out of his sights. The aerial battlefield fractured into multiple altitude bands, 15,000 feet, Japanese diving attackers, 12,000 feet, Wildcat's defensive turning 9,000 feet, Carrier Task Group AIA, A umbrella sea level, a deadly last-ditch sanctuary, each layer churned like a storm. Zeros slashed through the clouds, Wildcats clawed into impossible arcs. Tracer lines stitched the air in every direction. The battle was becoming a swirling funnel, and the Americans were at its core. The deadly spiral tightens further. Tanaka, humiliated by the early loss of Sato, locked eyes on Halvorsen's Wildcat again. Rage sharpened his precision. He dove steeply, engine screaming at full pitch, intent on erasing the insult. Halvorsen spotted him late. Too late to climb away, too late to run. The FM-2 could not match the Zero in speed. It could not outdive it. It could not outclimb it. But it could turn. Halvorsen pulled into another brutal spiral, this time rightward, the Wildcat groaning as centrifugal pressure slammed his body against the seat. The world tunneled into a whirling blur of blue sky and silver wings. He felt the stall buffet nibbling at the controls, felt the wingtip vibration that warned he was seconds from an unrecoverable spin. But he held it, and Tanaka's Zero slid wide again. They still underestimated the FM-2. Halvorsen wasn't just flying a Wildcat. He was flying a trap. And the Zero pilots were beginning to realize they had stepped directly into it. Tanaka hissed through clenched teeth as the American fighter pulled off yet another impossible low-speed pivot. He had fought Hellcats, Corsairs, even the deadly P-38. None had ever forced him into such knife-edge maneuvering at this altitude. The spiral tightened again, and his Zero, so light, so agile at mid-speed, began to betray him. The high-angle turn ate away his momentum. His wings fluttered. The aircraft shivered with the tremors of an impending stall. He eased back on his stick, trying to widen the turn, but that gave Halvorsen the opening. The Wildcat snapped tighter. And there, just for a heartbeat, the young American ensign had the legendary Tanaka boxed in his gun sight. But Halvorsen did not fire. He had learned the hard way, 2 weeks prior during a training run, that firing too early only stole speed, widened the turn, and lost the kill. Instead, he throttle-jockeyed with controlled finesse, maintaining the Wildcat's razor-thin advantage. His right hand danced between throttle and trim, feathering engine power by mere fractions of an inch. A combination of physics and grit kept him alive. Below, the Escort's carriers cut parallel white scars in the water. The sea glared up like a sheet of hammered steel. Anti-aircraft gunners tracked the fight from a distance, unable to fire without risking their own pilots. The sky was a pure dogfight arena now, detached from the ships they defended. An American pilot on the brink. Inside the cockpit, Halvorsen's breathing had turned ragged. Sweat soaked into the padding of his leather helmet. His right wrist cramped from exertion. The FM-2 shuddered again, once, then twice, offering a final warning. He eased a hair off the turn, threatening to lose position, but gained just enough lift to hold the spiral intact. Behind him, Tanaka pushed his Zero further than he ever had. The stall buffeting pounded against the wooden wings. Paint flakes peeled into the slipstream. Halvorsen muttered, "You're choking yourself, buddy. Keep turning." The trap was working. But elsewhere, the battle threatened to collapse around them. The sky erupts with new threats. A flash of movement. 3 Zeros dove from 16,000 feet, heading straight for the escort carriers. Their silhouettes cut across the sky like throwing knives. Dwyer saw them first. "Red section, we've got leakers. 3 bandits heading for the flat tops." Moriarty replied instantly, breathless from G-force strain. "I'm on them. Cover me." Halvorsen wanted to break off and help. Every instinct, every lesson about escort carrier vulnerability screamed to split away and intercept. A determined Zero could penetrate deck defenses, drop a 250 kilo bomb, and wipe out a carrier in one catastrophic blow. But Tanaka stuck to him like a shadow of steel and rage. Breaking would expose him. Breaking would kill him. Breaking would doom Dwyer. And yet, another Zero sliced downward at Moriarty, cannons flashing. One shell exploded near his left wing, punching a jagged hole through the metal. Moriarty cursed and rolled out, smoke trailing behind him. Halvorsen tensed, wanting to save his friend. But Tanaka fired a warning volley centimeters past Halvorsen's canopy, forcing his focus back into the spiraling Duel. He was trapped inside the trap he had created. The spiral collapses. Altitude bled fast. 11,000 feet, 10,700, 10,300. The combat funnel compressed tighter and tighter, sucking the 2 aircraft downward like leaves drawn into a vortex. Halvorsen gritted his teeth and shifted flaps to the first detent. The Wildcat threatened to stall, its wings twitching under physical protest. But the lift profile changed just enough to keep the turn alive. Tanaka couldn't match it. His Zero began sliding outside the spiral. Throttle too high, turn radius too shallow. A frustrated growl rattled in his throat. Just a moment more, Halvorsen told himself. Just a heartbeat. And then the American rolled abruptly, dropped his nose, then jerked back into the turn. An unpredictable, violent swing that forced Tanaka to widen further. This broke the symmetry. And for the first time in the engagement, Halvorsen's Wildcat snapped directly behind the Zero's tail. The trap had closed. The moment of decision. Range. 120 yards, angle off, perfectly aligned, enemy airspeed. Dropping into stall conditions, Halvorsen steadied the trembling gun sight. His thumb tightened on the firing button. But something flickered behind Tanaka's plane. Another Zero diving from above, attempting to save its commander. Its path cut a sharp diagonal, racing to cross Halvorsen's nose and force him into a defensive break. He had seconds. One shot. Half a second of clean firing time. Halvorsen said softly, "For Moriarty, this one's for you." He squeezed the trigger. The Wildcat's 4 Brownings erupted. The second kill of the morning. The tracers ripped through Tanaka's tail, shearing control surfaces clean off. Wood splintered into the sky like shrapnel. The Zero fell instantly into an uncontrollable corkscrew, plummeting toward the cloud layer. Tanaka fought the stick, screamed something in Japanese, either a prayer or a curse, before the plane vanished below in a spiral of smoke. Halvorsen didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled once, sharply. Because the third Zero, the one diving at him at incredible speed, was already upon him. And he was out of position. Too slow, too low, too vulnerable. The battle was about to flip against him. The third Zero screamed downward like a blade hurled from heaven. Halvorsen barely had time to yank his Wildcat into a steep, tightening bank. Tracers streaked past his canopy, white-hot needles slicing through the dawn. One round shattered harmlessly against the FM-2's reinforced armor plate behind his seat. Another punched a thumb-sized hole through the right wingtip, whipping a shrill whistle into the slipstream. The Zero blasted past, narrowly missing a collision. Its pilot, Warrant Officer Haruto Kanda, a rising star with perfect gunnery scores, hauled back on his stick, pulling into a brutal climbing turn. He planned to flip inverted above Halvorsen and dive again for the kill. Classic Zero vertical slash attack. Except the FM-2 Wildcat could do something no one expected, recover faster at low speed. Halvorsen chopped throttle. The Wildcat shuddered, nose rising just enough to bleed excess airspeed. Kanda overshot. Too fast, too steep. And Halvorsen snapped into a climbing spiral directly beneath him. The Wildcat's secret weapon. The FM-2 didn't have the climb rate of a Hellcat. It didn't have the guns of a Corsair. But it had something far more lethal in a low-speed knife fight. Absurd roll stability, vicious rudder authority, and a stall profile that allowed pilots to dance right on the edge of aerodynamic collapse. Halvorsen rode that edge like a man balancing on the blade of a sword. Kanda attempted to reverse his dive. His Zero stalled briefly, wings bouncing. By the time he restabilized, the Wildcat was already behind him, closing the gap with the slow, relentless inevitability of a tightening noose. Kanda's breathing quickened. He knew the angles. He knew he had one chance: dive away and use superior speed to regain initiative. He shoved the stick forward, but below them, the escort carriers filled his view. USS Savo Island, USS White Plains, USS Kalinin Bay. Their wakes resembled long scars across the ocean's surface. And he understood. If he dove, he'd enter the anti-aircraft curtain. Death either way. So Kanda did what every Zero pilot was trained to do in hopeless odds. He turned into the attacker, head on, full throttle, guns primed. The head-on charge. Halvorsen watched the Zero roll toward him, nose rising, the yellow cowling flashing in the sun. Kanda's 20mm cannons glowed with heat. He was seconds from firing. "Red 4, break off!" Dwyer shouted. But Halvorsen couldn't. Couldn't turn. Couldn't climb. FM-2 was committed. Locked into a head-on clash he did not choose. His heartbeat hammered. His gloved thumb hovered over the gun trigger. His world shrank into the deadly tunnel between two aircraft about to tear each other apart. The pass distance, 500 yards, too far to guarantee a kill. 400 yards, the Zero's cannon sparked. 300 yards, tracer streams laced the air. 200 yards, Halvorsen shoved the nose down violently. A 7.7mm round ricocheted off his cowling. Another tore through his right landing gear door. The Wildcat bucked, but held. 150 yards, Halvorsen fired. A blazing line of .50 caliber fire crossed the Zero's path. 2 rounds hit Kanda's fuselage, sparking bright sprays of metal, but not enough to kill. The aircraft screamed past each other so close that Halvorsen felt the violent slap of disrupted air slam his wings. He twisted his head violently, trying to reacquire the enemy, and saw something far worse. The leakers, 3 Zeros, those who slipped past Moriarty, were now diving toward the escort carriers, aiming directly for the Savo Island's stern. Deck crews scrambled. A klaxon wailed. Gunners slammed 20mm Oerlikon magazines into place. Officers shouted for evasive maneuvers. Halvorsen felt his stomach clench. If even one Zero broke through, hundreds of Americans could die. He shoved the Wildcat into a steep dive, chasing the trio with everything the engine could give. The aircraft buffeted in the slipstream. Altimeter unwound, 9,500 feet, 8,800, 7,900. Smoke drifted from Moriarty's wounded Wildcat as he struggled to re-enter the fight. Dwyer's voice came through, tight and urgent. "Red 4, stop those bastards, whatever it takes." Halvorsen pushed through compressibility tremors as the FM-2 screamed downward. The Zeros were seconds away from entering AAA range. The race to save the Savo island. Kanda, wounded but alive, rolled in behind Halvorsen. He was bleeding from a forehead graze. His Zero's engine vibrated violently, but he was determined to kill the American pilot who had humiliated his unit. Halvorsen now flew with 2 clocks ticking. Time to reach the Zeros, threatening the carriers. Time before Kanda shot him in the back. The sea came closer, an endless blue mirror. Wind howled over the engine cowling. The Wildcat shook from pushing well past safety margins. Halvorsen whispered through gritted teeth, "Not today. Not them. Not on my watch." He leveled out at 4,000 feet, gun sight rising toward the nearest Zero. Kanda closed from behind. The escort carriers waited below, helpless. The entire battle was about to hinge on one man flying an aircraft the enemy had laughed at. The 3 Zeros leveled out at barely 2,000 feet, lining up for their bombing runs on the escort carriers. Their shadows flickered across the water like predatory birds skimming a pond. The USS Savo Island, slow and lumbering, was the nearest prize. On her flight deck, sailors shouted and pointed skyward, their voices lost beneath the rising thunder of AA guns spitting streams of red-orange tracers. The Japanese pilots tightened their formation. Each carried a 250-caliber bomb, enough to gut an escort carrier in a single, catastrophic explosion. They were seconds from release. From above, Halvorsen's Wildcat screamed downward. The critical intercept. Halvorsen's engine howled in protest as he pushed the FM-2 to the edge of its structural tolerance. The airframe rattled violently, rivets humming like angry hornets. Kanda's damaged Zero clung stubbornly behind him, closing with murderous intent. 2 battles converged into one. Halvorsen jerked the stick left, then right, throwing off Kanda's firing angle by mere inches. The Japanese pilot fired anyway. 2 rounds zipped past Halvorsen's canopy, one sparking against his armor plate. But Halvorsen had no time to dodge further. The Zeros ahead were committing to their bomb drops. Range, 1,000 yards. Altitude, 1 to 800 feet. Mission stakes: the survival of an entire escort carrier and her crew. He squeezed the trigger. The first strike on the leakers. His 50-caliber gun spat fire, tracers slicing down toward the rearmost Zero. The rounds hit home, shredding elevators, punching through fuel tanks. A sheet of flame erupted from the aircraft's left wing as aviation gasoline ignited. The Zero tumbled, trailing fire in a long flaming arc that splashed into the sea behind Savo Island. 2 left. He rolled right, lining up a second target. But Kanda, relentless even in a dying aircraft, dived again on Halvorsen from above, firing bursts of cannon shells that forced him to break his angle. The second Zero released its bomb. The dark shape fell, whistling. Halvorsen's chest tightened in sheer dread. But the pilot had released too early. The bomb splashed into the sea short of the carrier, erupting in a geyser of white spray. 1 Zero remained, and it was the most experienced of the 3. The battle down to nothing. Halvorsen pulled back, setting up a steep, high-side turn. His body screamed under the strain. His gun camera rattled. Kanda's Zero flashed by overhead, smoke trailing from its earlier hits. A split-second opportunity formed. The attacking Zero drifted into the open, its pilot concentrating on lining up the Savo Island's deck. Halvorsen rolled inverted, dropped into a perfect firing angle, and held his breath. Range, 250 yards, angle off, shallow pursuit, time remaining, less than 5 seconds before bomb release. He fired. A long, brutal burst. The tracer lines walked across the Zero's cockpit, canopy, and engine cowling. The fighter jerked, wobbled, and then erupted in a cloud of debris as its forward fuel lines detonated. The aircraft pitched nose down, bombs still attached, and plunged into the ocean in a violent plume of white fire. The threat to Savo Island was gone. The final duel with Kanda. But Kanda remained. He appeared behind, Halvorsen in a hard-climbing left turn, his battered Zero leaving a faint thread of smoke across the sky. The two aircraft spiraled upward, locked in a desperate final dance. Kanda squeezed his trigger. His cannons clicked empty. He had no ammunition left. Still, he continued the chase, determined to ram the American fighter if necessary. A final act of defiance, a sacrifice for honor. Halvorsen saw him coming. His own ammunition counter showed less than 40 rounds per gun. He steadied his Wildcat, took a slow breath, lined up his shot. This ends now. He fired a short, controlled burst. 550 caliber rounds struck Kanda's engine block. The Zero quivered, smoke pouring from its cowling. Kanda tried to keep it flying, but the aircraft sagged, rolling slowly onto its back. Halvorsen watched as the Zero drifted downward, like a leaf falling from a burning tree. At the last moment, Kanda's cockpit canopy flew open. The Japanese pilot stood halfway out, raising one bloodied hand in what looked eerily like a warrior's final salute. Then he vanished into the cloud layer below, and the sky grew quiet. Aftermath. The carrier deck and the silence of survival. Halvorsen throttled back, the Wildcat's engine panting heavily from the brutal combat. The Pacific stretched below him in shimmering stillness, broken only by the wakes of the Escort carriers that had almost perished minutes earlier. Dwyer's voice called through, shaken but alive. "Red 4, damn fine flying." Moriarty chimed in, coughing through smoke in his cockpit. "Bobby, you saved us. The whole damn ship." On the Savo Island, sailors pointed upward, cheering the lone Wildcat circling above like a victorious hawk. Some removed their helmets, waving with unrestrained gratitude. Others simply stared, knowing they were alive because a 22-year-old farm boy refused to die. Or let them die. Halvorsen allowed himself one slow exhale. Not triumph, not joy, just relief so deep it made his arms tremble. Historical significance and legend. The FM-2 Wildcat, mocked, underestimated, shrugged off as obsolete, had just proven its worth in the most dangerous airspace of the Pacific War. The Japanese pilots who dismissed it as a relic learned instead that, at low speeds, in tight spirals, in disciplined American hands, the Wildcat could become a predator. Legacy would later record the day as one of the Escort carrier's most miraculous survivals. Proof that even small, outclassed fighters could turn the tide when flown with courage, precision, and relentless instinct. For Halvorsen, the memory of that morning would remain etched forever in the quiet hours of his post-war life. When the nightmares returned, spinning Zeros, burning wings, cannon flashes, he would remind himself of a single truth. He fought, he protected, and he came home. But on that December day in 1944, high above the Philippine Sea, the FM-2 Wildcat did more than survive. It earned its legend.